Hey, faithful listener. Thanks for tuning in to the P40 Ministries Daily Podcast. This podcast is dedicated to helping you grow spiritually so you can grow personally. Let's grow together by building a consistent Bible reading routine. This is Jen, your host, and today we will be discussing the book of Exodus. Hey guys, happy hump day. The week is halfway over. Yay! Isn't that great? But thank you for tuning into the P40 Ministries podcast on this Wednesday morning. And this is Jen, your host. But let's go ahead and just jump right into reading this morning. We're going to be talking about Exodus chapter 5, verses 1 through 9. We're just really cruising through the Old Testament, aren't we? It just seems like the Old Testament is really just flying by. So we don't have a whole lot to read this morning, but there is a lot to discuss. So I will be reading out of the WEB version of the Bible this morning. Grab that cup of coffee or that cup of tea, and let's go ahead and listen. Afterward, Moses and Aaron came and said to Pharaoh, "This is what Yahweh, the God of Israel, says, 'Let my people go, that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness.' Pharaoh said, 'Who is Yahweh, that I should listen to his voice and let Israel go? I don't know Yahweh, and moreover, I will not let Israel go.' They said, 'The God of the Hebrews has met with us. Please let us go 3 days' journey into the wilderness and sacrifice to Yahweh, our God, lest he fall on us with pestilence or with the sword.' The king of Egypt said to them, 'Why do you, Moses and Aaron, take the people from their work? Get back to your burdens.' Pharaoh said, 'Behold, the people of the land are now many, and you make them rest from their burdens.' The same day, Pharaoh commanded the taskmasters of the people and their officers, saying, 'You shall no longer give the people straw to make brick as before. Let them go and gather the straw for themselves. You shall require from them the number of the bricks which they have made before. You shall not diminish anything of it, for they are idle. Therefore they cry, saying, Let's go and sacrifice to our God. Let heavier work be laid on the men, that they may labor in it. Don't let them pay any attention to lying words.'" It kind of just seems to me that this particular Pharaoh is the big ol' arrogant jerk. Like the last Pharaoh we remember learning about in Genesis, when Joseph was talking to that Pharaoh, was much more receptive and almost caring about the Israelite people. But this Pharaoh is just a big old jerk. So one thing I should mention about pharaohs, and I did mention this a little bit in Genesis, but it's much clearer here in Exodus chapter 5. The pharaohs actually believed themselves to be gods, and they believed that they were basically the sun god, that they sat among the gods and were supposed to receive worship from the people the same way as a god would. And people believed this. They were just like, yeah, you're right, the Pharaoh is a god. There is no one like the Pharaoh, basically. And so the people very much believed that the Pharaoh was a god and that he was to receive worship, and basically that his word was the word. That is what the Egyptian people believed. So this Pharaoh here also believes this, and Moses would have understood this, being a prince of Egypt. He would have understood all about the Pharaoh and how the people revered him and believed him to be this god and everything like that. Moses would have absolutely understood this. So it says here that in verse 1, that after Moses and Aaron talked to the Israelite leaders and presented them all of these basically signs and wonders from the actual God, they went and talked to Pharaoh. And this would have been a very brave thing for them to do, because people didn't just have audiences with Pharaoh the way Moses and Aaron were about to. The Pharaoh would have expected a lot of worship and who knows what else. So Moses and Aaron going in there and making this request of the Pharaoh would have been a very brave thing to do. Now, God knew all about Pharaoh, this particular one. He knew that this Pharaoh was arrogant and a jerk and hated the Israelite people. He knew all of this. He knew Pharaoh's heart. He knew that this Pharaoh was not going to listen, but he gave the chance for Pharaoh to listen. At first, he gave that chance to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh didn't take it. Pharaoh did not take it. We talked about this a couple episodes ago where it says that God ended up hardening Pharaoh's heart. So he basically just gave up on Pharaoh. He let Pharaoh just do what Pharaoh was going to do and did not intervene. He let Pharaoh do what he wanted. Pharaoh had the chance, though, before God got to that point and just let Pharaoh do whatever he wanted, to listen. He had the chance to listen. God had not hardened Pharaoh's heart yet when we see this part, but Pharaoh hardened his own heart. And so it says here that Moses and Aaron goes and speaks to the Pharaoh, and they say, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, let my people go so that they can hold a festival for me in my honor in the wilderness." So they tell the Pharaoh that the people need to go take a festival break and hold a festival to God in the wilderness. But Pharaoh is so angry when he hears this because he thinks he's a god. So he says, "Is that so?" And I actually switched over to the NLT version. It says in verse 2, "Is that so?" retorted Pharaoh. "And who is the Lord, and why should I listen to him and let Israel go? I don't know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." So the Lord was not a part of Pharaoh's gods. He didn't worship God, the real God. He worshiped fake gods like sheep and the sun and the moon and whatever else the Egyptians worshipped back then. That is what Pharaoh worshipped, and he believed he was a part of that as well. He didn't recognize God. He didn't care about God, and he was offended that the Israelites worshipped another god that was not him, probably. So he was offended, and he says, "I don't know your God. I don't know Yahweh. Who is that?" And so he says, "I'm not going to let Israel go. And you have a lot of nerve to come in here and tell me that I should let Israel go." That's my own words, but I can guess that was probably what the Pharaoh was thinking here. But it says here in verse 3 that Aaron and Moses persisted, and they were like, "The God of the Hebrews has met with us." And they say that he wants us to take a 3-day journey into the wilderness so that we can offer sacrifices to him and worship him as our God. And if we don't, he will kill us with plagues or with the sword. But I kind of wonder about that particular part. Why did Moses and Aaron say that? Because God was not going to kill the Israelites with a plague and with a sword if they weren't able to go into the wilderness. And he didn't say that he would, but he did say he would send plagues to the Egyptian nation if the Egyptians were unwilling to allow the Israelites to go. God did say that. But it says here in verse 4 that Pharaoh replied, "Moses and Aaron, why are you distracting the people from their tasks? Get back to work." So he's angry. He says, "Get back to work. There are so many people in this land. The Israelite people are prolific. I'm sick of them, and you are stopping them from their work." And so he's basically saying to Moses and Aaron, because you want them to take this vacation out into the wilderness, you are stopping hundreds of thousands of people from working, and I can't allow that. And he's like, I am not going to let them do that. So right after this, after he sends out Moses and Aaron, he says to the taskmasters, the Egyptian slave drivers, and the Israelite foremen, and he says, "You are not allowed to supply straw anymore for making the bricks." And he says, make the people make the bricks themselves by going out and gathering the straw, and still require them to make the same exact amount of bricks as before, is what he tells the slave drivers. And so this would have been horrible for the people. Already they were burdened down with this crazy amount of tasks, slave labor that they had to do. And now they are not allowed to be provided the straw for making the bricks. Back then, Egyptian bricks were actually made with straw because the straw helped the clay bond better or something like that. And so the straw was an important part of making these bricks. But now the Egyptian slave masters, according to Pharaoh, are no longer allowed to provide the straw for the Israelites to make the bricks with. The Israelites have to go out and find their own straw and still make the required number of bricks at the end of the day. And so this would have been just absolutely terrible. And Pharaoh gives this order, and at the end of it, he says, load them down with more work. And he says, make them sweat, that will teach them to listen to lies. Pharaoh was so angry. He chose specifically not to listen to God and not to listen to the words of Moses and Aaron. But he also just claimed that it was all a lie as well. He said that what Moses and Aaron were saying was just a lie, and that this God, this Yahweh, did not exist, and that the Israelite people were choosing to believe a lie, and that they should be punished for this lie, that this Yahweh God, that their God exists, and that how dare they listen to Moses and Aaron telling them that they need to go sacrifice to their God when he was the God that he believed that the people should be worshiping, or something like that. So there was probably a lot of arrogance and pride happening within this Pharaoh that just refused to believe that God was out there. This Pharaoh was just so arrogant. But yet we see that other Pharaoh that we talked about in Genesis, where all he needed to hear was a dream interpretation to believe that God existed. So it's just so different. These two Pharaohs are just completely different, the two that we have heard about so far, that one was willing to listen to God, and now this one has hardened his own heart at this point and refused to listen to God's message. And we will learn more about this on Friday, so join me then at 6 a.m. to discuss the rest of this chapter and how Moses responds to this injustice that this Pharaoh is giving to the Israelite people, and how God responds to it as well. So join me then at 6 a.m., but also join me tomorrow at 6 a.m. for another episode out of Matthew, because on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I go through the New Testament, and we are currently in Matthew chapter 25, and we are going to be discussing more about the end of Jesus's life before his crucifixion and resurrection. But friends and faithful listeners, I've got nothing else to say except happy listening, and God bless.